The Russian invasion of Ukraine has led more than 400 American companies to shut down their business connections in Russia. But what about those companies that have not done so? We're joined now by Professor Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, the Yale School of Management, who's been keeping track of which American companies have done what. And Professor, thank you for being here. Your widely publicized list has, in fact, had the effect of pressuring many companies to exit Russia after first declining to do so.
Well, that's right, Brian. Thank you. It's a delight to join you. We didn't expect it would have this catalytic effect. What happened originally is there were a dozen or so unexpected firms and oil companies of all things, and consulting, accounting, and lawyers that are professional service firms usually rather jump off a cliff than engage in any kind of conflict. And thirdly, big tech moved up front from the heavy metal device companies of IBM and Dell and Apple and things to the social media companies. But then all these pretenders came along with look-alike public relations spin that were blurring the pretenders with the authentic good guys here. So we just created a list to have an authoritative separation of who's real and who's fake.
And at this point, what big companies have refused to pull out of Russia?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Initially, we had a lot of name brands. When we first put, you name it, we had just about every casual dining, as they would say, but we would say fast food chain was there. All the hotel industries were there, and all the fashion companies. Usually, the consumer goods are on the leading edge of social change, whether or not it's through the ethics of the leaders or through their sensitivity to public sentiment. But in this case, our list had this catalytic effect of celebrating the good guys, and there's sort of a hall of shame. But who's left now? There are still some companies in the U.S., Cloudflare, a big, of course, cloud provider that has some tortured logic for staying there. A company that owns Georgia Pacific Coke Industries, you know, the company that makes Dixie cups and Brawny towels and Great Northern and Angel Soft toilet tissues. They're digging in there in Russia and unapologetic about it. And it's quite disappointing to see that. And I think I mentioned Alibaba and some other major companies that you would think would have the good sense to pull out, but they're using some kind of a tortured logic of a humanitarian reason to be there or a concern. Suddenly they see themselves as paternalistic employers worried about the long-term livelihood of their loyal Russian workers when they weren't so worried about their U.S. workforces back before. But it's disappointing. It's misleading and cynical.
Professor, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Well, these are big multinational companies that presumably can survive pulling out, but what about those workers? What about all those people who lost their jobs? Isn't there a real sting there?
You know, if you really have a humanitarian concern, you would care about bringing civil society to a standstill. That's how you can knock a tyrant back to scale or even have a government change. This is what, of course, Gandhi did in India, bringing civil society to a standstill. This is what got rid of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania, Erich Honecker in East Germany and Poland, or even in Ukraine 30 years ago. It's by having the civil society stop the tyrant. The other alternative is to go to war. So what's worse for these people that are complacent and happily employed is to have Western bullets and bombs dropped on them. There isn't anybody on any side of this issue that doesn't admit we're perilously close to World War III, which would be catastrophically, not to be too bleak for the show, but our last war ever. It'd be so horrible. So what we're trying to do is something short of that. Does that mean you perhaps upset some of the comforts of the everyday Russian? Yes, they're entirely too complacent. There's a good book by Jacob Goldhammer called Hitler's Willing Executioners, which pointed out that the Third Reich didn't succeed just because of one cruel tyrant, but in fact, it was the complacency of the German public. In this case, enough already by saying, oh, propaganda, when they are identified as a rogue nation by all the countries in the world with their major.
Professor, what big companies do you think are about to pull out? Who could have a devastating impact that's still in there now?
If we could see some of the major grain companies that have put out some companies like Archer Daniels Midland and Cargill, that would have a big impact because they're certainly a part of the breadbasket of Europe. They are in there. We give them a D, around a 7F rating, because they're putting off some long-term investments. We don't know what they are. It would matter a lot if they pulled out. Same with the oil servicing firms, Schlumberger, or Baker Hughes or Halliburton. It would matter a lot if they were to pull out. But right now, they're digging in there with some public relations smokescreen that we've had to acknowledge to elevate them from an F grade to a D.
Professor, I noticed you also, a man after my own heart, you went after your own educational institutions with their connections to Russia over the years.
Yes, Brian, we do share that in common, is that you and I both, wherever we see it, and sometimes it gets us both into trouble for doing it. In this case, MIT wasn't too happy, but Yale was thrilled. There was a time where these oligarchs, which is very recent past, circling around all universities to try to cleanse their wealth with the stature of many institutions. And what we identified back in 2018, I pointed out who these people were, and I was happy that Yale cleanly and quickly got out. MIT, not the same thing. They told me, I worked with them privately back in 2018, and they got in a huge way, hundreds of millions of dollars hidden, as they were taking money to prop up what is sort of a kind of a fake university that was doing some pretty scary research that MIT was working on with them that gets perilously close to national defense issues. And I won't bore you to tears on the technology of it all, but it's things that no U.S. university should have been giving to the Russians.
Well, Professor Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, you're on the case from the Yale School of Management. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you. I'm most honored.
Coming up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the editors of Mediaite and what they had to say about comedian Jon Stewart. Not so good. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams Media Group. And Aidan, you've chosen as the winner this week in the aftermath of the big slap at the Oscars, Sarah Seidner of CNN. Let's see what she had to say.
I have to be honest, I'm a little embarrassed that I'm even talking about this right now. We've got inflation that is crushing families. We have millions of refugees who are running for their lives, trying to find refuge, mothers and children. And we've got Ukraine, which is literally on fire and being bombed.
So Aidan, she put it very much in context.
Right, and I think she said what a lot of us are thinking this week. I should point out that Sarah Seidner, she is a CNN senior national and international correspondent. She has reported from as far as Jerusalem, Abu Dhabi, Los Angeles, and now she's back in New York. She also just returned from reporting on the Russian invasion of Ukraine in Eastern Europe, particularly the refugee crisis there. So it's not surprising that she would look at the story like the Oscars slap and see it as slightly less important than what's going on in Ukraine and elsewhere. I do want to say that we shouldn't be too serious about it. Obviously, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars is a big story. We should cover it. We should revel in it. But I think considering what's going on and considering what this CNN correspondent has been covering over the past couple weeks, her comments really rang true for a lot in the media.
And overall, the media covered it quite a bit.
That's true. I think it was the top story on almost every show on cable news on Monday. So there was no shortage of coverage of it. I'd say that Sarah Seidner, as far as I know, is one of the only journalists who pushed back on that.
And for this week's loser, you chose Jon Stewart. Tell us why Jon Stewart, the comedian.
So Jon Stewart has his new show on Apple TV. It's called The Problem with Jon Stewart. And he had a pretty odd, I would say, segment on his show this week where he discussed systemic racism in America with 3 guests, all of whom are white. Now, one of those guests is a woman by the name of Lisa Bond, who became famous in the last couple of years for throwing these dinners where, and I'm not joking here, women pay thousands of dollars to be told that they are racist and be explained why to them that they are racist. She's kind of known as one of the more griftier of the anti-racism consultants out there. And for some reason, Jon Stewart thought that she would be a good voice to have on this panel to discuss systemic racism in America. She got in a big argument with Andrew Sullivan, who is a fairly controversial writer, at least on the topic of race. But she didn't confront any of his arguments. She dismissed him as racist and said that she didn't even want to have a conversation with another white man.
All right, so let's see what happened.
And I did not come on this on this show to sit here and argue with another white man. That's one of the reasons that we don't even engage with white men at Race to Dinner.
If I could finger snap, I would finger snap right now. Let's
you'd be
remove it
finger
then
snapping
from the.
by calling me a racist, Sean.
You've been doing a pretty good job with it yourself there. So.
And for that, you say Jon Stewart was quite the loser.
Right. I mean, that sort of rhetoric is expected from someone like Lisa Bond, who, again, is a sort of anti-racism consultant. What's disheartening is to not only hear Jon Stewart's audience applaud her for those kind of comments, but Jon Stewart to also agree with her about it. I think it's particularly disheartening for people watching, and particularly people who are fans of The Daily Show.
What a surprise, though, for Jon Stewart as a loser. That's a surprise for a lot of people who think he's great.
Right, and you know, his show, which debuted recently on Apple TV, has not been getting a lot of attention. This is one of the first times I think that I've seen a segment from it really go viral on Twitter, and it's mainly because of those comments. You know, I'm not defending anything that Andrew Sullivan said on the show. He argued that systemic racism does not exist and is not a problem in America. But I think the conversation was particularly unproductive because of the arguments made by Lucid Bloom there.
So this was a stumble, you think, for Jon Stewart?
Yeah, I think he should probably get better bookers on his show, unlike the bookers that we have here.
So he's looking for an audience and he's yet to really find one, I guess.
Right. I mean, we don't know what the audience is, given it's Apple TV. They don't really release stats in terms of their audience. But I have not really seen much hype around this show.
All right, Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for all of you for watching. We'll see you again here next week on the Law and Crime Trial Network.